episode of Quake. In this episode, I want to look at silent meeting for worship, which I know I've looked at before, but this time I'm wanting to look at perhaps what happens when it goes wrong. So, which I mean, not that like something crazy happens or anything like that, although who knows what would happen then. But what I mean more is when it goes wrong, maybe for yourself internally. And I wanted to do this video mainly because I've been doing a lot of reading of Quakers talking about Quakerism and Quaker stuff, and naturally also they therefore talk about silent meeting for worship. And I love the way they talk about silent meeting for worship. It's very poetical, it's very mystical, it's very um, esoteric, I suppose. There's some examples of what I'm talking about. I've recently read A Simple Faith in a Complicated World by Kate McNally, and also in the Quaker Quicks, who've just been amazing last year. So hopefully 2024 will also be very good for Quaker Quicks publishing. Practical Mystics by Jennifer Kavanagh. And both of them, great books, please read. But both of them do mention silent meeting for worship, and both of them talk about it in just are very appreciative of it, and talk about it being, the wellspring of their faith and the centering aspect of Quakerism in terms of that allows it, that galvanizes it to do everything that it does as a religion, as a method of life, or however you want to see it. And I suppose probably the creme de la creme of talking mystically about meeting for worship is probably Thomas Kelly in the Testament for Devotion, which I think both Mark Russ and Ben Wood, when talking about their favorite Quaker book, that was the one that they mentioned. And it's brilliant. It's lovely, and it makes me, oh God, I'm so glad that I'm part of this tradition. But the problem is that we are all human, and we go to meeting, and sometimes things go wrong. And so I want to talk about that, about things that can go wrong, and what we can do about it. Because I think it is important to talk about that, because it's a type of worship which relies on yourself. There's no one else is doing it. People might be giving ministry, but then it's down to you to then internalize that, to think about that, to be part of the meeting. And if you go in reading Kelly, and you go in and you're sitting in silence, like, then that can be quite tricky and could also maybe put people off Quakerism, which we don't want. Saying I want to put this out there as saying that, yeah, sometimes you're just not with it. Sometimes it's not how you think it should be. To appreciate that that's fine, and maybe some tips as to how to get round some of those things. So what do I mean that it goes wrong? What things can go wrong in a meeting for worship, apart from something crazy? I mean internally, what can go wrong internally? You're sleepy, I think, is probably the main one of things that go wrong. Uh, Depending on what sort of person you are, 10:30, which is I suppose the time that most Quaker meetings start, can be quite early. Or you might just be knackered from you might have been doing lots of stuff, or you might be working hard or whatever, and you're just very tired, or you didn't sleep well. And you go to meeting, and you're in a nice warm room, and everyone's quiet, and you might close your eyes as a way of centering down, and you know well, we've all been there. I mean, let's not even go into like what your body might be doing. You might be in a lot of pain. Maybe you might have a really bad cold. You might have a cough. You might have sneezing. You might really need the loo. There may be external distractions, maybe outside the meeting house. Who knows? We can't control what goes outside there. Anything could be going on depending on where your meeting is. Um, uh, or maybe even in the meeting, maybe, I don't know, you're feeling particularly irritable, and maybe a person's swinging their leg, or someone's coughing and it's stopping you, and you're getting irritated by that, and you just spend the whole meeting being irritated. Or I think probably lastly, and probably most simply, you're just not in the zone. You do all your normal things. You don't need the loo. You're not particularly sleepy or grumpy, but nothing happens. It can be very disheartening, because And especially maybe if there's no vocal ministry at all in that meeting, you may be thinking, oh, well, what did I do wrong? Or what's that saying about my connection with the inward light? Why was I left alone in my worship time? Why did nothing come to me or to the meeting? Well, I suppose that also you might have the absolute opposite problem of that, where instead of nothing coming to you, too much is coming to you, and it's not actually good spiritual stuff. It's like you can't shut your brain off. You're constantly thinking about uh, things you got to do, things that you're upset about, things that you're angry about, just like constantly going around. And I think that happens to everyone. I'd like to think that more often than not, I can start with that and then move away from that. But if I'm really stressed, or if I'm really angry, or if I'm really sad or whatever, then obviously that's not going to be able to happen. So lots of things can go wrong, and that is fine. I suppose, this isn't individual meditation where if if it doesn't go right, then I suppose there's no one to blame but yourself. Maybe, I don't know, but it can feel like that in silent meeting for worship, because you felt maybe that you've not used the time correctly, or you've done something wrong, or um, that you've let the meeting down. Um, Especially maybe if you've been on it spiritually for like you've been feeling very quakily or whatever, and then it just fizzles out into nothing. So we call that periods of dryness, um, where for one reason or another it's just not working out. And I don't think actually that's really talked about, and I think it should be, because I think people get very concerned by it, and I know that I've been in periods of that where I've thought, hmm, what am I doing wrong? And obviously the answer is we aren't doing anything wrong. I think there are things that we can do to maybe help avoid these things happening, but I think it's, as I said, because it's not simply down to you. You do have the mattress, so to speak, to fall back on in terms of the meeting. That it's not just down to you to provide the ministry vocally, and certainly ministry doesn't need simply just to be vocal at all. Um, that your silent might give other people um, uh, leadings instead. Furthermore, there could be reasons why it's just not working out right now, why you don't feel that you're feeling particularly quakily in meetings for worship. Maybe there's something for you to consider. Maybe you needed that time to go over whatever was making you sad or angry, and you needed that time. Maybe it's all coming down to a greater realization a week, month, a year, however long down the line. Maybe you need to take that time in order to do that. And it's very hard, obviously, to see what that's going to be or what that's going to look like at the time. But I get it. You've read your Kelly, and you're like, oh, why is it not like that? Why? And it's very frustrating. So here are maybe some tips as to what we can be doing. So as I said, firstly, it's not down to you, and I think be humble with that. It's not always going to be, if you were having spiritual like revelations on a weekly, daily basis, then I don't really think that's sustainable over a long period of time. I think you might be able to have that for maybe a month, or maybe a year. I mean, it would be a pretty good year, but that train's gonna stop. And I think how you deal with that is a whole other aspect of like this Quaker spirituality that, as I said, I don't think we really talk about. So I think that humility is very important, and that we are patient with ourselves and trust that we're doing what we've been asked to do. We are gathering, we are listening. If nothing's coming, then it's nothing. That's because maybe you need to be, instead of listening to the inward light, you might need to be listening to others. maybe you just need to, as I said, hunker down and take the time to assess where you are, and maybe you need to do that internally for a while. I think there's a lot that you can do in preparation for meeting for worship to help alleviate some of these things. I think everyone has their own way, and I don't want to necessarily say you must do this in order to feel good in meeting for worship. But I think, I know that some people go for a walk before meeting for worship. I know that some people use maybe the journey there, however that journey is done, to, I don't know, listen to certain types of music, or to listen to an audiobook about something, or just to have the car completely silent, or the walk completely silent, in order to start that centering down process. Obviously, go to the toilet before meeting. I think very valuable. Um, uh, Not always possible, but I think highly worthwhile. And I think although that's really well and good, doing everything you can in order to make sure you're going into meeting calm, or grounded, or centered, whichever word you want to use. I think that isn't necessarily always the ideal, and is not necessarily going to be the complete right way of doing it either. Because I think a great part of meeting for worship is bringing what you have to the table, and if that is anger, if that is stress, if that is upset, if that is irritation, then that's what you're bringing, and that's where you are right now. And I think that's important. I think that's important to go through and to share in a healthy way, in a conversation with the inward light, rather than anything untoward. And that time can be processing that and going through that, and maybe looking to maybe put it on the shelf, saying, this is not helping me, this is not leading me anywhere. I'm going to do what I can to try and put this emotion to one side, to wrap it up, and hopefully the meeting will help you do that. And if not, then, as I said, really do listen out for meeting for worship. See if listen out for vocal ministry from others. Um, See what's actually being said, because it might be relevant to you. You might not be in a position, because you're too this, that, and the other, to actually receive yourself, but actually through listening, you might be listening out for things that have answers for you that you didn't necessarily come to yourself. In terms of external frustrations, like, I don't know, the people outside having a very loud conversation, not moving on, or a car alarm. That's the best. When a car alarm goes off and no one is coming to sort it out, and it's just incessant. So what on earth can you do against that? Well, I suppose I'd like to think that maybe the more experienced you are as a member of that meeting, that you'd be able to use your spiritual fortitude in order to try and push through that. But I think sometimes I think if you were anywhere else in the world, in life, and something like that happened, you were reading somewhere in your room, or you wanted quiet in at home, and then a car alarm was going off incessantly, you would get angry about that, but you might end up like, oh, I'm going to go out, or I'm going to do something else. I think whatever it is, it's a lesson in patience, I think, and endurance. It You are given that time where you can't really escape. You have to listen to that sound, or that whatever it is going on, and think, well, why is this bothering me? Because I think sometimes in life, when we don't have time to really think about these things, we let small things really bother us, like that, and we don't really give it the time to think, why is that bothering me? Can I find a way so that it doesn't? Whereas in meeting for worship, you have that time in order to look back. So if it's like someone in meeting coughing all the time, why is that bothering you? Is it that you're making it all about yourself, and that you think that meeting for worship is just for you? Because it's not. Maybe that person's really ill and's come having a hard time, and that's coming for support. It's again, I think it's letting the world happen to you in a way that I don't think we in the modern world really do. You are there, you are present, and the world is doing its thing, and it's not, the world doesn't stop because you're at meeting for worship. And there are people who don't know it's meeting for worship, and even if they walk by a Quaker meeting house on a Sunday morning, they won't think, those Quakers might need us to be quiet so that we're doing our because they're doing their meeting for worship in silence. They won't necessarily even know to think that. And so I think it's kind of putting yourself away from those distractions and seeing why they bother you. And remember that actually the inner light doesn't care about those outward distractions. That it's powerful enough to get through to you, whether 10 car alarms are going off or whatever. So if you're worried that because that's happening, you're not going to be an open vessel for messages from the inward light, then I think trust that it's going to get through to you, even if the car alarm's going off, even if you're really annoyed. That's not going to be an issue. So why are you upset? And sleep. I can say, make sure you have a good amount of sleep before your meeting for worship. But I think that's probably the hardest one, because there's nothing you can do. Like when your eyelids are drooping, there's very little you can do. I mean, I sometimes like move my hands and move my feet, but then I'm thinking, oh gosh, what if I'm really annoying someone else because I'm moving or moving my feet or moving my hands around. So yeah, you can't win. Suppose maybe that's when I would turn to a book, or some physical resource that I can use. So most Quaker meetings for worship will have books on the table. I sometimes bring one, so maybe a Quaker Quick or the Bible if you want, whatever floats your boat. And again, just plowing through that. Just I think putting the time in, instead of being just falling asleep or whatever. Battling through that and seeing how that makes you feel battling through that. I think there's so many life lessons to be had from meeting for worship, whether it's going successfully spiritually or not. I think even if you're just dealing with the world or with your own anxieties, I think these are really powerful things. And yes, okay, maybe it's not always like the wondrous prose of Thomas Kelly's Testament to Devotion. But I think these are all valuable lessons. And I think remember that you're in it for the long game. You're not in it for that snap of inspiration or spiritual connection, great though it is. And also, most importantly, you're not even in it for you. You're in it for the meeting. You're in it for cat. And you need to be upholding your own meeting. You need to be there for them. And what I wouldn't want is, oh, I'm too sleepy, or I'm too angry, or I'm too sad, I can't go to meeting for worship. Because if everyone thought that whenever they were sleepy, moody, or irritated, or whatever, there'd be very few people in meeting for worship, and sometimes there's very few people in meeting for worship anyway. So I think we have to go through those. We have to go through that, and we have to say that sometimes it's just not going to be very good. But I think there is always a lesson there. I think that's probably something that's really important, that there is always a lesson, even if it is just plowing through tiredness or working through your own irritability. Because think about how often actually in life do you get to do that. So anyway, I think my point of the video is that sometimes, and I think especially when I was starting going to meeting for worship, it was I was sometimes very shocked and upset that it wasn't as powerful spiritually as it is in Quaker books. I think because sometimes I think we are guilty as Quakers as waxing lyrical about meeting for worship, because it's our form of worship, and so of course we will, and I'm very proud of that tradition. But I think also sometimes we do have to talk about, well, what happens when it goes wrong, and what what are the lessons of that. So I hope maybe that's been helpful. It doesn't always have to go well, and if you're feeling sleepy, irritated, or sad, it's not the end of the world. You can still have a successful meeting for worship as a community, and it's absolutely fine. Anyway, so thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again soon. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.